the weird thing is about that, I think, like when you're writing for, again, this slightly goes against what I was saying, but I think it's always helpful to know about the idiosyncrasies of an instrument and know about, you know, where string players are going to change the bow, where brass players are going to breathe, you know, where a drummer might play a fill, or, you know, or what's the comfortable key for a piano player to play in. It's definitely an important thing to know. But then I also do think sometimes you get quite interesting from somebody who might not know how to write naturally for strings or for brass or for percussion. You also sometimes get this kind of quite interesting, quirky thing. I've definitely done things with people before where it's like, wow, this is quite difficult to play, but actually the sort of result is quite unusual.
So welcome, and thanks so much to Rory Simmons without a D.
That's it.
Rory Simmons without a D. Writer, composer, producer, remixer, string arranger, string orchestrator. He's got his own projects, Monocled Man, Fringe Magnetic, working with the fabulous Elliot Cole in Harley Quinn, and then a CV of a cross-genre of the good and greats of modern music, from Palatable, Blur, Back for Lashes, Chasing Status, Labyrinth 1975, and then through to some of the views will know Adam H. Gibbons, who is Lack of Afro. You've worked with him as well. Yeah. And also the fabulous Fyfe Dangerfield as well. Who, for me, is just a genius of music. And I don't know why he's not so well known.
I know. Well, he's back around now. He moved to. I mean, I haven't spoken to Fyfe for a while, but he moved to Ireland for a while. Had a little one. Do you know him as well?
Yeah, personally? I know him quite well. Yeah,
such a great dude. Yeah. Such an amazing. That kind of, just to jump in, that came about in a really interesting way. You know the program Late Junction, the Radio 3 Junction. They asked me to do like a special. They were doing a series where they were asking different people to collaborate with other musicians as like a special thing for the program. About 5 years ago, and they asked me, and I think I originally was like, can we get Bjork? And they were like, we're not even going to ask her. But I thought, you know, shoot for the stars. But the next person, I was like, it'd be wicked to work with Fyfe. I hadn't met him. I don't think we'd had. It's hard to remember now. I don't think we had any sort of relationship or particularly any mutual friends, but I'd always been such a fan of his music. And they put us in touch, and he was delighted to be, well, they got in touch with him, he was delighted to be up for it, and we just got stuck in. And he's so interesting because, like, you know, the Guillemot stuff is so, I mean, it's beautiful pop music, but it's so incredibly quirky, lyrically, production-wise. Yeah. The whole thing, it's just got this kind of, like, this tilt to it that just makes it something other than just another box-ticking indie band. It's kind of like, it's got this really unusual flavour. And of course, he's really into free improvised jazz and like fairly crazy music, and really into like free improv stuff. And he's just mad energy as well. You know his vibe. He's so exuberant and. He's quite an intense character, but it was such a thrill to work with him. And we did a bunch of stuff after that. We did a couple of like little gigs, London Jazz Festival, and some other like little thing. And then I decked on bass with the Guillemots at a festival in Birmingham, like not long after that, which was really fun. Was I playing? Yeah, I was playing bass. Yeah. I was sort of playing a bit of guitar and a bit of bass. And then after that, I went on to get him to record on a song that I co-wrote for him on another record we did. But yeah, he's such a fascinating guy, and really, when we did all these like little duo gigs, he was bringing along old cassette recordings of like weird things, like little bits of John Peel chat in between on the old John Peel show, and also like bits of recordings of his mates doing like quite quirky, like almost Cambridge Footlights, his mates doing impressions of him, or like telling jokes between each other or telling made up stories. And he would just like, he'd be playing something, or he'd be doing this kind of like ambient thing, and suddenly this burst of like these like teenage kind of quirky guys telling these jokes. But the humour that he brought to it was beautiful and really individual.
Yeah, no, he's fab. I mean, we got in touch. This is showing how long ago this was through MySpace.
Oh right, yeah,
ages ago. And I think it was Greg, the original drummer.
Oh yeah,
Greg Stewart, who's a lovely guy as well.
Such a great guy, yeah.
And it happened that who was I playing with? We were both doing Glastonbury at the same time. Yeah. And we were exchanging MySpace messages, and we couldn't get across the carnage of Glastonbury to whichever stages we were both playing.
Of course, yeah.
And then we just carried on from then, because I'd got through the window pane, I'd already bought it. And I was like, this is amazing. You know? And the fact that record, you know, I mean, in the UK, that sold 250,000. And you think, people have really bought into this. This is going to go, because then, you know, then I got to know Fyfe and his huge intelligence of music and his emotive output.
Yeah. Which I mean, when you re-listen to that, what was the massive tune? Love You Through Stars.
Oh yeah, Made Up Love Song 43.
Yeah. Like that's a mad song.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the outro and all the BVs and the sound design of it, and the mix is really weird. Like the bass sound is crazy. None of it makes sense as a hit apart from the lyric, but and also the lyrics are really kind of unusual and abstract. But and on that, like, I think, I don't know, maybe it was partly ambition taking over, or so, I don't know. They only did one of them, I think, in the end, or maybe two. But funnily enough, there's a track on Up in the Air, which I arranged for string quartet, and we had it playing as we walked down the aisle, or as we walked the other way out the church at the end, or signing the register or something. And it's a really, you know, my relationship with that band is, I love their music.
Yeah.
And
well, it's funny you should say that when you're going to, you know, coming up backwards from the aisle, if you like. When I got married, coming backwards from the aisle, I'd done a remix for them of I Must Be a Lover off the third album, and that was the track we walked backwards to.
That's a great song. I love that song.
It's great.
I completely forgot about that. Wow, that's great.
They hated my remix. They hated my remix, so it never got used.
Oh well, you know, it got used at your wedding.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, we walked up to Sigur Rós, actually. Brilliant. I've forgotten the name of the track now. But yeah, I wrote some string players in and done a little string arrangement of a Sigur Rós track for us to walk up to. Yeah. But yeah, Fyfe is amazing. Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure he's moved back. He was doing a few kind of classic Fyfe in a field, playing some like little live stream things. So I should really get back in touch with him. But we did a song as well together. Actually, I've forgotten this. So I've got this trio with two Norwegian musicians, which is not really happening anymore, called Eyes of a Blue Dog. Mm-hmm. And we did this track, which was a duet called Before the Night Ends, that we wrote with Fyfe in mind, and asked him if he was up for it, and he was delighted to sing on it. He sounded amazing. And it got a little bit of spot play everywhere, you know, typical thing. But when he sent me the stems through, he sent like, I mean, I've still got them somewhere. They're absolutely hilarious. There's some of his beautiful kind of gossamer falsetto, and, you know, his really rich, full-bodied, you know, chest voice. And then there were like 80 stems of like incoherent ramblings and like kind of, I got a real insight into what the process of making those out. There were loads of him doing almost like an impression of a drunk Scottish guy, like on the outro, which I think he was a bit peeved we'd taken some of that stuff out. So we used, out of like the 80 stems, we used about 5 of them. But there were all these hilarious bits of him like playing stuff on a toy piano along, which were great. And definitely if that had been part of the process from the beginning, that would have been something I would have used. But because it was like, you know, the type of production where we're going to finish something to a certain point and then add this pre-written part on top, it didn't quite fit like that. But yeah, such an interesting guy. Yeah, such a wonderful dude.
Yeah, you know, he really is. So let's take you back to the beginning, because I mean, I've spoken to everyone, whether they're engineers, artists, whatever. Why did you start in music? What was it about music? Because a lot of people from the outside, like a lot of the viewers and people, think it's like a magical world that you suddenly just goes ping our music. But the reality is, it's a very precarious and bonkers thing to do. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's in hindsight, you can sort of it's easy to sort of draw a narrative about, the reason I did this was to get to there, and the reason it's there I mean, the reason why I picked up the trumpet to start with, as a trumpet player first and foremost, was just because that was the instrument that was available to me, and I didn't have a burning passion for that thing. I really liked music, but then that ignited something else, made me want to pick up the guitar. And then from that, I decided I wanted to, you know, take it through GCSE and A-levels. And from there, it was further education time. And, you know, from my friends and my parents, it was like, naturally, you know, you're going to do something, you need to go to university or music college. And I was like, well, definitely music college then. So I don't think that sort of burning ambition to be a musician was fostered. But I don't think, when you're a kid, everything is just like, you're so fearless. Yeah. And you're just like, oh yeah, I'll do that. That sounds fun. Exactly. There was no sort, I mean, thinking about like what I do now and like the elements of my career and how they all fit together, there is no way I could have foreseen that or expected it, or maybe arguably even wanted it, the amount of times that things change and you have to adapt to change. But yeah, there was no single narrative. I think it was just a lot of happenstance and, you know, things happening and me being like, actually, I do really like making music, being involved in playing or creating or composing music. And that's like the only single thing I can trace through that would follow the steps from being a teenager, playing a brass instrument, which is not a particularly sexy instrument, and probably didn't engage with a lot of the music, like the music you were making, you know, didn't really engage with all the, you know, the rock and metal music and indie music that I was into in the 90s. So then started playing guitar. Then somehow those two things coalesced into me being into jazz and electronic music, and then went to university, went to music college. And yeah, I think that's it really. I mean, in hindsight, you can definitely impose a story about how it came about. But I think I still wish in many ways I had that fearlessness of being you know, you get older, you become more cautious and you deliberate over decisions more. Yeah, which is obviously great in many ways, but in many ways it can also arguably sort of stunt your career, because it means you won't as fearlessly jump from things to things, because you sort of believe you're only, you know, you're in a box, and you kind of, to deviate from it is,
it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Where when you're a kid, it's like somebody gives you a new instrument or gives you a new opportunity to do something, you're like, yeah, great, yeah, I'll try that. Why not? Course, you know, it's you don't really consider it too much. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's, I mean, in terms of the actual history of what I was, you know, I did, playing the trumpet, what gave me a strong grounding in sight reading, I think, because being a brass player, you know, if you're a guitarist or a bass player or a drummer or even a pianist, I guess, if you're playing contemporary music, you can kind of bypass the sight reading thing a bit, which is great in some ways, because it arguably gets you more to the heart of the instrument and definitely the heart of the music. But it is an important skill set, which is, from all the people I know who haven't developed that from the outset, it's a hard one to go back and pick up. Yeah. Definitely. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I did it the opposite way to you. Right. Which is, you know, fell in love with music. I didn't think I was going to be a musician, but then became one. And then you go, fearlessness, well, I'm a musician now. But I just learned to play by playing along to records. Yeah. And learned it that way, and then started to understand what intervals work and what don't. And this is a chord and that's a chord and this is the key. And then just through talking to other musicians you meet, and they'll explain something in their non-technical language, most of it. Yeah. And then you built up your knowledge body. But the very first session I was ever given, before I became a session player, which I suppose I am now, was for KD Lang. And I was 20. Oh, right. I was 22. Yeah. Just got a call, we've got a session for you, do you want to do it? KD Lang at Noma Studios in London, blah, blah, blah. Arrived, got their train down from Birmingham with my bass guitar, put my bass guitar in reception, went into the control room, she wasn't there, the producer said, here it is, and it was all written out, it's all scored out. Right. And I just looked at her and went, okay, great, I'm just nipping to the loo. Went to back to reception, walked straight out, hailed a cab, went home and thought, I need to learn to read music. Wow. Because there was no one there to talk to who would have... If she'd been there or a guitarist were there, I said, you know, I don't really read music, you know. So the way I did it, I got the Standing in the Shadows and Motown book, the James Jameson book. Oh, right, yeah. Because I knew half of the songs anyway, because I'd worked them out myself.
Yeah.
So I just looked at what's going on, the chart of what's going on. I was like,
yeah.
oh, so those two dots is the push note, the syncopated note. Well, that's obviously the E, and that's that. And then you work out what the the sharps and flats are.
Yeah.
So I learned to read that way, but I can't sight read. And I was talking to Guy Pratt, the famous bass player, and he regrets it eternally. So
I mean, it is. I think it is one of those things. It's not reverse engineer. It's what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, to learn something like that in retrospect is hard. I mean, I think maybe something that is comparable for me is like, because I've been as a producer, getting much more into the engineering thing, learning a lot of the sort of the basic physics of sound engineering and of sound design are something that I think that's comparable for me. It's like, I didn't learn this when I was a kid. You know, I didn't start with a 4-track. I wasn't in my bedroom as a teenager with a 4-track and with a crappy mic and learning about gain stages and preamps and that stuff and soldering my own preamp together and all that stuff. So I guess that's how I would compare. But for me, obviously, from playing trumpet in school bands and jazz orchestras and just reading music like a book, that's definitely a really, really valuable skill. But I do think it's interesting, actually, because like I do think that whole thing of you saying playing along to a record, there is something that gets you much more in touch with the instrument in that way. In fact, something that quite often I find when my playing needs some freshening up as a trumpet player, one of the things I always find is really good is transcribing. Transcribing is a classic thing for all jazz musicians, as you know. They'll go back and listen to Miles Davis and take down a solo or a John Coltrane solo, which has a wealth of information harmonically and rhythmically. But I often also find if my technique is feeling a bit soggy or a bit stagnant, if I go back to the kind of source of listening something and just replicating that sound on my instrument, I sort of bypass a lot of the technical hang-ups, and you're just using the instrument as a conduit to replicate something. And there is something about that gives you this kind of like, you don't think about technique too much and you don't get hung up on it, therefore that technique kind of flows a bit easier. So as a technical exercise, aside from harmonic and rhythmic development, I think transcribing or playing along to a record is a really, really powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because obviously if you're reading a piece, then you're engaging a different side of your brain to transfer the information to your hands. But if you're just listening and playing it, then, I mean, I'm not it's a different interaction. And as you said, that transcribing something or replicating it, again, it's different, isn't it, than, oh, here it is, I'm going to play it.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I think because often you're also, on any instrument, as well as the notes and the rhythm, you're also trying to emulate the sound. Yeah. And I think also part of that kind of that focusing in on something like that, technically, when I've done that stuff on guitar, when I've taken down a guitar part of something, it's like afterwards my technique feels really fluid because I've not been getting worried, overthinking about hand position or pick position, or it's quite a natural flow. So and I mean, of course, as well, it's such a valuable thing to sort of listen to the way someone else is playing, especially when somebody's improvising a line and just the tiny quirks of something which wouldn't naturally sit under the fingers or the lips for you to bring that into your own playing gives you this whole wealth of stuff. I'm installing the virtues of it. I don't do it enough. I should do it more. But every time I do it, it really freshens up my playing on any instrument, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting when you talk about the greats, like, I don't know, like a Miles Davis trumpet part or John Coltrane thing. It's the bit that always fascinates me, because I quite often work out Miles. I say often, I do it occasionally. I'm doing the same thing. Some of his classic, slower trumpet parts on the bass. Because I work out what the chords are, and I love the way he selects his notes, even the obvious ones. Say, like, if you go to all blues, so, it's obviously it's a 12-bar in dominant sevens, blah, 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 with that, with the weird E-flat instead of going back to the C, etc. But the way he picks his notes... It's, you get the obvious ones, and then you get the wrong note. The tension, that kind of that tension and release. Yeah, totally. And I think that gives you, not only can you sort of unpack that to see like what part of the scale is he hitting there and for what reason, like theoretically, but you also kind of you learn something about the emotion and the intention of that whole thing through that process. So I think there's a wealth of information
in doing that stuff. I mean, the other thing that I see people do quite a lot is the synth matching sounds thing, I think, which as an audio exercise is really important as well. When you see somebody, I mean, I'm not very good at this, but I sometimes see people, I've sometimes done it with people, where they're trying to transcribe a synth patch or something, and they'll really go to town on like, right, that's a sawtooth, that's two oscillators, one is pitched an octave up, the envelope looks like this, the amplitude looks like this. It's such a great skill for getting the ears working and really focusing yourself in. I mean, it's a slightly different thing in terms of the result, but it's a similar process, isn't it, to transcribing? You're trying to emulate a sound, and I think that's also something I should do more of. but yeah, totally.
But what you're saying goes to the heart of pretty much every musician I've spoken to. So I was talking to, I know, for instance, Steve White, the drummer.
Yeah.
And he was saying about early doors, because obviously he's a technically fabulous drummer. He can pretty much do anything, and he can read like a demon. But when he started, he was playing with mates in bands, and he would have listened to a Buddy Rich part, trying to play it the same, but not getting it. And one of his friends had come in who sort of had the bass line from, I don't know, Baby Love, from the Motown song. And they put the two things together, and before they knew it, by listening to each other and adapting, they'd come up with a thing. Yeah.
Well, it's those errors in people's playing, or those sort of inconsistencies which create the individualism that, like, you know, there's the old adage of, like, you can build the perfect session band, you can pick the best drummer in the world, the best bass player in the world, the best guitarist in the world, but you then get the same sound on every type of music. And it's actually that combination of cronkiness and inconsistency and character which builds, I mean, it's a cheesy thing to say, but it is the lifeblood of real people making music. So
absolutely.
I mean, not that I'm going to sit here and slag off like the amazing session musicians who can play stuff perfectly, because that is really important as well. It's often the combination of those people with other people that give something really, you know, a real colour to stuff. I can't think of an example of that at the moment, but I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of examples of, you know, bands with super tight musicians, but there's one person in the band who doesn't quite nail it, but actually that's
what makes it,
it brings the colour, Well, arguably Miles in the later years, you know, he was kind of, his chops weren't as good, but yet he brought some, you know, some real fire to those when he's surrounded by perfect musicians.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So music college. So you got to the bit we get to music college. So upon leaving music college, did you think I am now? Because people are really interested in this sort of thing. And again, we're probably imposing a narrative that didn't exist. But when you leave, it's like, okay, I'm a trumpet player. I've built up all this skill. Where's my career? How do I then start?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I guess because the nature of music colleges, even though they're not like vocational places, by the end, most people are doing lots of gigs.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really, as you know, it doesn't work that you do 4 years at a conservatoire and then on the, you know, 1st of August when you leave, you suddenly jump into doing gigs. All the way along, you're building up your professional stuff. And so at the beginning, I think my kind of journey through music college was like, I think it was quite a steep growth. Like, not saying I was amazing when I came out, but there were plenty of people who arrive at music college who are kind of fully formed musicians and they just kind of cruise through. But I had a lot to get together when I was there, and hopefully I did get a lot together. But as I went through years 3 and 4 of that 4-year course, I was doing more and more like big band gigs, recording, a lot of writing, a lot of like hustling and getting my own gigs, you know, getting little gigs at bars in South London, going over to Brixton and, you know, playing at jam night, meeting somebody, asking if I can run the jam night one night, building up all those kind of those contacts more in the jazz world. Yeah. And then I was also starting to do quite a few function gigs, so like wedding gigs or party gigs or like, you know, the massive function scene that we have in this country, which is, I mean, I'm not that involved in it these days, but it's bloody massive, and it employs a lot of musicians. Yeah. Well, did until 4 months ago. Well, but I suppose at that point I was doing a lot of those types of gigs, so a lot of like, you know, wearing my cheap student suit on a Friday and Saturday night and driving to like a hotel somewhere and doing a gig, and then, you know, getting paid, I don't know, I guess 150 quid those days, and then coming home and doing jazz gigs in the week. And yeah, when I left college, I guess I started doing loads more of that. So I was doing loads of those kind of gigs and doing a few things abroad and a bit more recording stuff. And I was also writing a lot and getting my own jazz stuff together. And yeah, I mean, really, at that point, I was just in my car a lot, driving around, doing lots of gigs, playing the trumpet, and building up more and more contacts and meeting more people. I did the National Youth Jazz Orchestra as well, which was like Nigel. For people, there's very mixed opinions on it, but it has become quite a staple of a lot of people have gone through. A lot of the great session musicians have been through that band. It's called a National Youth Jazz Orchestra, but like the top age, when I was playing in it, there were people up to the age of 30, I think, playing in it. It's been a bit more formalised of late, but years ago it was a bit of a free-for-all, and anybody who was in college or post-college could kind of join. So that was really useful because they used to do loads of gigs, so we used to travel around. Play with loads of different other bands and festival stages and stuff. And then I got a gig. I got the gig with Jamie Cullum, was looking for somebody who played trumpet and guitar. So that was in early 2006. And when I joined that band, I guess that was my first sort of taste of like pop stuff, I guess. So then I started touring with Jamie, and I still do today. So that's I've been touring with him for whatever that is, 14, 15 years now. So that was the first big break into like more, big commercial gigs. And then off the back of that is kind of the vibe. I think when you get one gig like that, you just start playing with more people that are in that scene, and you meet lots of people, and you get known for doing a certain gig like that. And, hopefully it helps your career and helps your kind of, your CV. Well, I mean, CV is the wrong word. People will be more likely to book you on a higher profile pop gig because you've already done one, I guess. But really, that all came out of just doing loads and loads of function corporate stuff, which in a way as well, like that was a period where I was doing loads of Saturday night gigs where I would like be turning up and they'd be like, Sir Duke, we're going to play Sir Duke, we're going to play it in A instead of B tonight. Can you do that? And so you kind of cut your teeth on like, oh, can you take a trumpet solo on this bit? Oh, we haven't got a keyboard player tonight. Can you cover the middle eight of, and I like the fairly kind of crappy examples of the sort of skills transferable skills in terms of oral ability and, doing things on the fly. But they were quite important, I think. Yeah. And I think, like, it's great people who don't have to go through that period of cutting their teeth on playing Mustang Sally in every possible key. But I do think there is some, you develop a transferable skill in that, in terms of your oral ability and instrumental ability and being able to just get on with it and make some music with people in that way.
Oh, absolutely. I think all of that. I've just heard someone saying, and basically you can't really say no in those situations either. It's like, okay, we're going to do it in A, and yes, I will cover the middle eight because the keyboard player isn't here. But I think that takes away the overthinking things as well, and the fear of like, oh well, if I've got to try, let me think about if I've got to put in a different key, and just do it. Yeah,
I definitely work loads better than that. If I'm in a situation where like, can you just do this? It's like, yeah, totally. If it's like a 2-week, we're going to do this tune in this key, it's not going to be all right. It's like, I think so. Maybe it's not. Maybe you've asked me, so it's possibly not going to be. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like an old fogey, but it is a different scene today, and I think a lot of people maybe don't have to do that, and that is good in a way because people should only play the music they want to play. But there is, it was a worthwhile it felt like an extension of music college education in a way, of like, and there would be old fogies who would come into college, and we had a lot of quite intense lectures about fairly advanced jazz harmony and rhythm and all that stuff, and there would be some that would come in and say, oh, you need to make sure you can play a 12-bar blues in every key, you need to be able to make sure you know the horn line to do I do and all that stuff. And actually they were right, because it is really important if you take that route, but it's so different for everybody, isn't it? Because then I chat to Adam and talk to Adam about his route, and his route is so different that like the only hard and fast rule, it seems to be, is there is no hard and fast rule.
Exactly.
And I think that quite a lot about a lot of stuff about, in terms of music career. I mean, the big thing I always think, I'm slightly digressing now, so apologies, but like I always think about this thing of like the two ideas I always hear people talk about are, on one side, people are like, choose what you want to do, focus on it and stick with it and go for it. And other people on the other side, completely other side of the coin, are like, always be open to doing different things and make sure, always have your finger in different pies and just, you know, smorgasbord and take little bits of this, little bits of that. I mean, those two things are completely at odds with each other. And I still, you know, as far into my career as I am, I still don't know which one holds the most credence, really. I mean, they're both really viable things, but that's one that I think about a lot, because you see people who have been really successful who have chosen the place they're going to aim for, and they've just gone for it, and they've been really successful. Then you also see people who have they do a bit of arranging or a bit of, you know, engineering or a bit of DJing and a bit of performing, and they've had a great career as well. So that's the one thing that I would say. It's like it's very hard to say any hard and fast rules. It's just like chat to different people, and people find their own route through, don't they, I think?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really interesting you say that, because I've come across that all the time as well. Not from people saying it to me early doors, but, you know, from me hearing people say it to younger students, if you like, or they're not just younger musicians, you know, do that, because that's what you're really good at, or do everything. But I think the thing that, you know, oscillates between these two sort of boundaries of, you know, left and right, or whatever it is, some like structuralist sort of confines of the world, it's the motivation to do either. You know, if you go on that path, it's to keep that fearlessness, I think, or to, I'm going to be fearless and try all of these things. You know, I will do some engineering. I may never have done some before. I'm going to learn how to do it. Yeah, of course I'll do a remix. Yes, of course I'll do a DJ night. You know, all those sort of things. It's that motivation and fearlessness, I think.
Yeah, and I think also none of those things are ever to the detriment of your skill set, of course, are they? I mean, like, there's so many things. I mean, until I started, like, you know, until I had a studio at home and I started getting people over doing sessions, engineering sessions, I used to go to studios when I was, you know, doing trumpet sessions before I did any of this, and you'd have the producer in the control room, and you'd be like, "Can you just drop me in 2 bars?" And you'd be like, I just need 2 bars in, quick, you know, being very impatient with producers. And then you're on the other side, you're like, now it's me, you know, with strings or a brass section behind me, being like, I need to think about mic position, saving the parts correctly, labeling the parts correctly, comping as we go, making sure everyone's playing the right notes. And there's so much to think about. And I think that's just one example of how, when you look at a different technique of music, or a different strand of music, it informs your approach to another one. So none of those things are ever going to be detrimental. Like you say, like we talked about the reading music thing at the beginning, you can definitely get into music without, and it shouldn't inhibit you from playing music if you can't read music, but it's also not going to hurt your musicianship to know what's going on, I don't think. I mean, I can't think of, I mean, some purists might say that, you know, when you learn too much about music theory, you start making prog rock, and that's a bad thing for the world. But I don't subscribe to that. I can't really think of one element in the chain that if you don't know about it, it's going to be good for you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's that, you know, I think it goes back to that punk ethos of, like, you know, it's all about expression. Blah, blah, blah. If I learn theory, I'm going to overthink it. But what I think is, like, theory is just something to help you. That's all it is. And you can abuse it like a punk.
Yeah, totally.
As a DIY hip-hop artist, you could know everything about theory and go, right, I'm going to deliberately do it wrong here, because that's where my creative idea is, that's what I want to do. So it's, you know. Yeah.
I mean, you can't be scared. I mean, it becomes like a political thing, but, like, you can't be scared of ideas, you know. They're just ideas. So nothing to be scared about knowing the ideas. I mean, that you could politicize something like that quite easily, but... Yeah, I mean, I even think in terms of something I'm sure that you espouse is, like, the idea of knowing about the music business side of things as well, and engaging in that stuff. Like, I mean, that's a big thing, which I think is being addressed more in youth music education at a higher level now. Like, people are basically saying it's not going to detriment your music career if you know how to exploit your intellectual property, or if you learn how to, like, make the most of what you have to offer. That's not going to kill your ethos as a human being and as a creative spirit. and that's something I'm still learning about as well. And yeah, I can't think of a single part of this whole chain that's not, that for a rank and file violinist to know what the assistant engineer is doing at Rack Studios, or for an intern at a management company to know what the session drummer is to understand each other's skill sets is not only empathy, but certainly as a musician kind of gives you a lot of bigger skill set in which to build on and make good decisions.
Yeah, I mean, to put, if like sort of narrow that down into, like, I don't know, some of the best drummers I've worked with. Yeah. They're really, really good, and not just on their technical drumming side, because they also play piano or the guitar or the bass. So they don't just go, yeah, drums. It doesn't matter about the letters. It's all about the numbers. Yeah. They actually go, oh yeah, okay. So that's the bit where they play, the B flat. So, and that sits really well with the melody there. So what I'll try and do there on the toms there, and not be putting cymbals everywhere.
Yeah.
And you can extend that across.
Serving the song, isn't it? It's the idea of serving the song. Yeah. Yeah, totally, and that's an understanding of what's going on in the music more generally. Yeah. I mean, again, that's something that can be helped by playing more instruments. I guess the more you play a different instrument, the more you understand the way it responds and how it sits in the music. But yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So the first time I wrote I wrote a brass part. And I went over to Holland to get it played, and these lovely Dutch musicians, they're amazing. And I'd become friends with them socially anyway, because they were doing a lot of stuff with Paul Weller when he had this, in the early 2000s, we had this brass section. So I'd gone over to do something else on a production thing, and I'd written out this brass part, and I gave it to them, and they're we can't play it. I said, it's really easy. I actually wrote it on the bass, and I've just written it out for you. I said, yeah, but if we do that, we will die because we won't be able to breathe.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think, of course, you need a gap to take a breath.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of the weird thing is about that. I think, like, when you're writing for, again, this slightly goes against what I was saying, but I think it's always helpful to know about the idiosyncrasies of an instrument and know about where string players are going to change the bow, where brass players are going to breathe. Where a drummer might play a fill, or what's the comfortable key for a piano player to play in. It's definitely an important thing to know. But then I also do think sometimes you get quite interesting from somebody who might not know how to write naturally for strings or for brass or for percussion. You also sometimes get this kind of quite interesting, quirky thing. I've definitely done things with people before where it's like, wow, this is quite difficult to play, but actually the sort of result is quite unusual because you don't really hear brass players play like that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you checked out, do you know this guy Colin Stetson, the guy that does all the Bon Iver stuff, the sort of wall of saxophone, Bon Iver stuff? He's amazing. I mean, that's a sort of different example, but there's definitely examples of people who write for an instrument who don't quite know how to write for it, but in doing that, they bring something a bit different out of the instrument. Yeah. But going back to the original thing, it would never be to the detriment of your ability to know what register to write for. In a certain instrument, or what key is comfortable. And I'm still learning about that all the time, thinking about, comfortable registers for brass players, even though I'm a brass player myself. But yeah.
So then, going back to where we were in the imposed narrative or timeline. So you got the gig with Jamie Cullum.
Yeah.
Trumpet and guitar.
Yeah.
Which obviously
and bits of synths and stuff.
Yeah. So then obviously. It happens to everyone. It's like you meet people, and then your network of connections expands, and it's all about referral and people recognising, oh, Rory's really good at that, so we'll try and get him in for this. But then, how did you move to doing a lot of the string stuff?
Well, how did I? Well, I suppose I was when I left college, I had this band, which was it's kind of interesting, really, because my own output as a musician has gone from being quite unusual and abstract to probably more in the pop realm. So normally people, I guess, start off with something a lot more kind of conservative musically and then expand. I've kind of maybe gone the other way. So at the beginning, I had a band called Fringe Magnetic, which was it was like a chamber ensemble-y type thing. So there were the lineup was 2 strings, so violin, cello, flute, clarinet, bass clarinet, rhythm section, and me. So I did a lot of writing for strings there, and a lot of the influences were like a lot of quite unusual kind of downtown New York 90s, 80s, 90s John Zorn, stuff like that, but then mixed with almost like cinematic orchestra, but like a weirder version thereof. And I guess like my string writing started there, and from there I started doing bits and pieces of like small bits of string arrangements for people, and you know, sometimes string quartets, string trios. And then I did an album called Glass Dancers, which was about 2013, which was like more an experimental kind of electronic album with string quartet, which I was sort of originally commissioned to write a couple of pieces by this string quartet that I was working with a bit. And then from there I was like, oh, why don't we do a record together? And we sort of did this thing together, put that out and did a few gigs. And from there I've sort of, I didn't record that album to make it a calling card, but it has been quite a useful calling card to do more kind of esoteric kind of string arrangements for people. And then from there, various like little bits of pop stuff when somebody needs, you know, a little string quartet thing, or and then since I've had the studio at home, been doing a lot of tracking of strings in the studio, and then it's like a one-stop shop because I book string players and they come over, I do the arrangement, do all the comping, and it's quite an easy, quick way for me to provide strings for people. So that's sort of the route. I did formally study arrangement at Trinity as well, where I studied. And I had, I guess, 3 really great teachers there, composition teachers. But I had second study with a guy called John Thomas, who he's now, he works in LA now. He's like a massive, big time string arranger in LA, and he's changed his name. So he's now John, I'll have to look it up. He's now got a double-barreled name.
Right.
But he was an amazing amazing arranger and amazing educator. And while I was at Trinity, I did second study composition and arranging with him. So I had one-on-one lessons with him for 2 years in the middle. And he was amazing. A lot of, stuff about, a lot of voicing stuff and stuff about voice leading and writing for players and all that kind of thing. But also he's just a really inspiring guy and really encouraging. So yeah, John was fantastic. I should really look. I'll look it up and post it to you. What his new name is. But he arranges on loads of massive, big budget LA, blockbusters these days. And then I had I had a lady called Izzy Barrett, who was the head of jazz at Trinity, who gave me much more of a jazz perspective on writing for big band, and, more in the kind of contemporary big band sphere. And then I had another woman who was called Alwyn Pritchard, who was much more like squeaky gate, contemporary classical, kind of crazy composer. So it was really 3 really interesting approaches. Like you had the kind of lush kind of LA classic string arranger. You had more of the jazz style kind of big band arranging, and then also had this kind of like squeaky gate, kind of contemporary classical experimental style of writing. So 3 really interesting approaches, which I like to think there's a bit of each one of those in my arranging. But, again, I'm still trying to learn and develop all the time with that. So there's always a new challenge, definitely.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and it's fun, taking it from my perspective, like the first time, I can't remember the first time, like when I was in Ocean Colours, when we started, let's get a string quartet in on. We didn't even know we know what a string quartet is. Let's put some strings on it. Yeah. And that sheer excitement when they're tracking it and you listen to it on the big speakers, it's almost like suddenly your silly pop music has become legitimate. It's become this huge thing, and then you gravitate to working with orchestras, which I've been lucky enough to do. So probably with Weller first, and then with Ashcroft, and then even playing live with the Heritage Orchestra behind you. It's that huge majesty of strings, which is what the artists are wanting or experiencing. But obviously, when you're writing for artists, they've got this vision of what these strings will do and change the world for their song. Does that is a thing that you have to really deal with, or do you just kind of circumvent it?
Yeah, I mean, some people have people write guide parts, and they're simply looking for you to write to make something palatable for musicians to perform. I mean, I think that is an interesting thing that actually, I'm not straying too far off topic, I hope, but it does seem that it's gone. There's that little space of when you have a brass section of 3 or 4 people, or a string quartet or trio, where like that job of being the arranger for those size ensembles has become kind of defunct, because you're expected 50% of the time as a brass player, you'll get there and they'll be like, oh, this is the part we want, and they'll play it to you, and you're expected just to listen to it and then make that a workable part for your instrument within the track. And I think the same is often the case for string players. And while that can be fruitful, it can also, there's loads of room for error. I mean, like you said about writing something for a brass section that there's no space to breathe, and things being in the wrong key, or even like turning up and people haven't really thought about what instrument you're playing. You know, like they sort of, what they know is an instrument that you blow through, but they haven't really thought, do I want a saxophone on this, or a trumpet, or a trombone, or like, let alone any nuance of what type of trumpet player you might want, what type of sax player, or, I mean, this is not all the case all the time. Most, a lot of the time you've got proper arrangements and you've got people who really know what they want, but often you've got great musicians, great artists who probably don't know what they want, and also probably couldn't articulate it if they did. So and that job of the sort of smaller size arranger is quite often just disappears these days, because you just turn up and you're expected to do something. So when I'm asked to do strings for stuff, it's often they're asking me, because I can do a little arrangement and record the whole thing. So generally, I mean, I think people are fairly happy to kind of give you creative license, but some people are very specific. I did something on somebody's this girl's EP I just produced, a new Canadian singer called Sorsha, who which her first singles just came out. She really wanted something that she was quite specific about the sound, but again, she didn't know how to articulate it. She was like, I want something that's really. She was like, I want something that's really crispy and scrapey and nasty and horror movie sounding. It's like, okay, so you basically something which is like super pop, like super kind of harmonics, really, really quiet single bows, high and slidey, so we got this, again, she couldn't articulate it, and you could easily imagine the scenario where you would get a string quartet into the studio to do that, and you would just say that. You would say that, and they would probably get it, but also it just means you've got a 3-hour session with people. 2 hours of the session is spent unpicking what the person actually wants before you by the time you press record, you've only got an hour left. And I think that's when I do sessions with people, when it's people I don't know who phone up and say, can you come in for a session? And they want to leave it. We'll just play it to you on the day. It'll be fine. It's like, send it to me, because we'll just get loads more done. If I know what we're doing, I mean, like, I'm there to get as much done as we can and make it as good as possible. And, we can definitely be more effective if we've got more time to plan. And even if we rip up what we've written, like, at least we've got a starting point. And, I mean, I think I've seen, again, I trying to be patient, as I know what it's like being on both sides. But, does that answer the question?
It does,
I don't know.
yeah.
I kind of rambled a bit.
No. People see, this is what people find really interesting as well, because a lot of what we talk about, I mean, obviously quite a few musicians, producers, whatnot, watch it, but obviously quite a lot, just like people who love music. They find it fascinating. Again, because it's that, there is that slight idea, it's like, okay, well, people just go into a studio for, I don't know, a day, and they come out with an album. And not like, oh, the strings on this, and then they just presume, well, someone just writes it and everyone just plays it immediately. But it's that level of communication, or like communication competency, for people to actually explain what they mean to someone else so they can interpret in a way that everyone's happy. I think that's the thing, like the communication thing and interpretation is really important. And I mean, I think also the personal relationship you have with musicians as well, like the diplomacy of realising how you're going to get the best out of somebody. And that sounds, like, when I say that, it sounds patronising, but it's just the diplomacy of working with anybody, whether you work in an office or whether you work in a, you just learn how is the best way you're going to coax the best thing out of somebody. I think there's a lot of different personal skills that are like, I don't know. I always watch. There's a few brilliant clips of
the other side of the coin of like Leonard Bernstein absolutely burning a load of musicians in rehearsal for West Side Story in the 70s. Have you seen these? Him giving the triangle player some real shit. Have you seen these clips?
Yeah.
There's a brilliant bit with the trumpets as well, where I think they're rehearsing West Side Story, and the trumpet player complains about something, and Bernstein just, whoa. And the same with Placido Dominguez in that thing as well. But what I'm saying, that is not. I mean, he did a great job, of course, but like learning about those personal relationships and how to, at what point to put your foot on the gas and at what point to, coax something out of somebody.
Yeah.
Is a really important skill.
Yeah. It was a couple of people have actually used the same phrase. One was guy who played with the Prodigy for 10 years. The other guy's an engineer called Don Morley, and and producer called Don Morley, and they both spoke about emotional intelligence when you're dealing with other people. It's like, what is the vibe for this person in their context they're in right now?
Yeah.
So I might want something different and better from them.
Yeah.
But how do I get it without making them feel they can't do it?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think the same with the co-writing thing as well, because when you're in a room co-writing with somebody, it's that thing of following the rabbit hole, because like if you're too dogmatic about this has got to be the way it's got to be done, then it's just this constant fight. Sometimes you've got to trust somebody and just go a little bit of the way down, I always think this with BVs, actually. This is a place that I'm always quite specific in my head about where I think when I'm recording BVs, whether it's with Elliot Cole or with other singers that I'm producing, and we're writing a song and I'm like, I think we need to beef this up here and put some BVs in. If it was a brass part or a string part, I'd be very, very specific about these are the notes I want, this is how I want the triad to be stacked, or this is the extension I want, this is the lead line. With singers, like, I often start off like that, but I often find there is I hate the word intuition in these circumstances, but I do think there's an intuition with singers where they sort of know where it's going to naturally resonate vocally for them to, even if they're not like super kind of developed harmonically, will know what part of the chord to hit. They'll have just an intuition of where their voice is going to sit nicely and resonate and feel natural. So I found that with a few singers particularly, where it's like I could dictate what I think the harmony should be because I really know what I want the harmony to be. But actually, I think we'll get a better result if I just let you do it, because you'll find a better place for it to sit. And I think that's one of those things where you can have all the knowledge you like. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to let it. You have to trust people's sort of intuition and not. I mean, Elliot Cole isn't like that, because Elliot Cole has such good ears that I can, and he has such an immaculate voice that you can sing him any extension or play him any extension on the piano that you want him to sing, and he'll just nail it and it'll sound flawless. But sometimes it's good to trust people's instinct a bit, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I think a lot of that with vocalists as well, particularly vocalists who don't play an instrument. Yeah. When you talk about intervals and stuff with them, they sometimes get a bit lost what you mean, because we either visualize it on a score or in front of our, and we actually tactile with it. Yeah. Whereas they're, and they just have to let them try what you're saying, and then sometimes they get it slightly off, and you go, oh my God, that little bit there. Yeah. There's that's it. Sometimes it's the mistakes that really are the things that stick. Yeah, I mean, I think the tactile thing, I mean, I would relate this even to playing the trumpet as well. Like the idea of any instrument where you can't see the note in front of you, you've got an extra, there's a lot of abstract stuff to think about there in terms of, not only just your oral ability, but just the performing of it. It's like, because sometimes you're not going to nail it because you can't see it, just press it. So I totally think that. There's been a lot of singers that I've worked with that we've got the most from BVs, where I've just said, this is where I think roughly we should go, sort of register-wise, but leave it up to them. Yeah. Which I don't think I would, for example, you'd never do that with a brass player. No. Well, you would if you were a producer who didn't arrange or score, potentially. But if somebody came to my studio and we were doing a trumpet, saxophone, two-piece horn section, I would never say, just choose something that you think sounds right. I'd be like, no, I know where this needs to sit, but
I guess it's partly the individual sound of the human voice as well, isn't it? The fact that everyone's voice there's a lot more play than the sound of voices than there is in the sound of a saxophone or a trombone.
Absolutely. And it's like, just going with your point, you wouldn't, if you hired a classically trained cellist who is not used to improvising, you would just bring him into a session and say, "Oh, just play whatever you want," because they'd be like, "I can't."
Yeah. And I mean, maybe you've experienced that as well. Of that, I mean, that's a real thing that you see quite. I mean, the people I work with regularly definitely don't have that inhibition, but you see that a lot in classical players who just play something, whatever, just something around C is fine. It's like I can't. Yeah, of course they can play absolute fly shit and get around the instrument better than most. Yeah. So it's that's an interesting psychology in itself. But I mean that's something which is, I guess that's rooted from music education, I suppose, and the sort of the culture of classical music versus the culture of pop music.
I think the old school sort of music education where the sort of Western art music is the canon that we will learn and perform. Yeah. You know, because these are the greats, so you need to perform as written. Obviously, you can put a bit of interpretation, but as written. So you're definitely we're not going to train you or allow you to improvise. Yeah. Against the sort of lower art, which is like, didn't used to be worthy of study, which is pop music. Yeah. There may be a Beatles song or a Leonard Cohen song, which will always be Hallelujah. That's it. Yeah. Because they're almost worthy of studying correctly.
Yeah, I think this is changing big time in jazz education, for example, has had that same kind of reverential treatment of jazz music alone and not pop music for so long, which is now coming out of that now. Because like, if you go to any of the music colleges now, you speak to any kids on the jazz courses, they're going to be as interested in like the 1975 or Calvin Harris. Well, maybe not Calvin Harris, but like they'll be as interested in non-jazz music as they are in jazz music. But in the last 20 years, it was almost like the only reason you would ever learn any jazz would be the only reason you'd ever learn anything that was pop music would only be as a way of improving your ability as a jazz musician, rather than the sort of the discrete worth of pop music, which is a weird one. And the classic thing was always like, if you're a jazz musician, the only non-jazz CDs you have in your collection are Tom Waits, Stevie Wonder, and Bjork. And it's like, oh, come on, what's wrong with Sonic Youth and Nine Inch Nails?
Exactly.
Or like,
I think it's that thing of like, I'm militant about being a jazz player. That's it. And then obviously now, as you're saying, you do loads of production, so you're engaging with the technology that you weren't interested in when you were studying to be a jazz player. And now, of course, obviously you do all your trumpet stuff. You've got your projects where you're doing all that. But now it's like the whole arranging, writing, composing, doing all the orchestration, but also then doing the mixing. All of that comes together to create something that has gone. As I said, it's impossible to put a timeline on all these things. If you went back to you just about to go to music college, right, I'm going to be a jazz trumpet player. And it's like, now you go, well, I do all of these things. Yeah.
And it's so weird because when I was just about to go off to music college, it's just things have changed so much, don't they? I mean, it's just like my interests then musically was so different to what they are now. Well, they were just very, very specific. But then I was always really into rock and grunge and metal and indie and all that scene through the 90s. So I do think some of the seeds of that have come back to kind of like, I think, and in terms of production now, not that I make things that sound like 90s grunge records, but like I think some of the like little seeds of my interests at that point are still there somewhere underneath now, So I sort of like gone through that grunge period as a teenager, then through this kind of jazz period, and then kind of out the other side and doing a bit of everything, I guess. Yeah. But it's interesting.
Yeah. So this is what I've asked everyone, and some people have replied with, "You can't ask me that." This is normally producers because they feel like they're going to offend people, and then other people have just jumped straight in. with answers immediately, like they'd already prepared them, which they hadn't, because I hadn't said I was going to ask this. But can you pick 3 things that you've done? They could be whole albums or single tracks that really resonate for you.
that I've done myself.
You know, it could be your own stuff, or you've been on, you know, you've done an arrangement for of anybody, you know.
Yeah. Well,
because obviously we'll put links to them as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think. That is a really hard question.
It's hard, isn't it? I would apologise.
No, it's fine. Well, I think the last album I did with Fringe Magnetic, I'm really proud of, which was, which really, I sort of wasn't going to do any more gigs for that band anyway. And we just did this record at the very end, which was called Clocker, which was like which was a point where I was getting really into kind of production and kind of editing and processing and stuff like that, but still writing quite kind of complex, kind of contemporary classical meets jazz sort of stuff. And we did that album, and I'm super proud of that. Even though I didn't really promote it, we put it out, and it was I was at that point where like it's still one that I listen back to, and I'm really proud of that. I think it's really great, but I didn't really promote it because I'd already decided the band was finished. But it's definitely one that I've got a load of copies at home, and I'm always happy to give a copy to somebody like, oh, check this out if you get a chance, because it was a real melting pot of me really getting stuck into that processing thing, but really trying to weave it around the writing.
Right.
And it was also one that I did half at home, but I made sure I had enough budget to go to a proper studio and did the whole thing in a nice big room, and everything's recorded really nicely. Yeah, I still did a lot of processing on everything. So I'm definitely really proud of that. I mean, some of the gigs we've done with Jamie over the years have been really exciting. I mean, when we did the second proms we did, I sort of wrote the overture, like the opening overture to it, for symphony orchestra with Heritage Orchestra, and I'm really proud of that as well. I think that sounds great, and that was great. That's the only time I've really done a full symphony orchestra bit of writing. It's like a 3-minute overture at the beginning, using a few themes and weaving a few themes across each other. But there's been loads of Jamie things that have been a real privilege. I don't know, like, I mean, I would also say maybe playing the Universal with Blur at Hyde Park was really exciting. But then that's not a great one to pick because I didn't have much creative input into that. But it's just quite an iconic thing to be involved in, just to play what was potentially their last ever UK show. Maybe they'll do more, I don't know. What was that, 2016? Playing the Universal, and there like being 80,000 people there in an iconic venue in Hyde Park. But then, yeah, I'm going to say those three.
Okay, good. You see, they resonate for you. And people have picked really... some people have picked really obvious things, and some people have picked some things that you go, wow, that's really strange, you know, like, I don't know, I can't think of any examples where someone's just like picked the first album I ever made with my band, even though it was terrible. Yeah. And then other people have gone, oh, well, yeah, when I made that record with Tina Turner, or, you know, well, this one because it was our biggest hit, or whatever, you know, and some people have gone, yeah, well, I think just because of that, because of the moment.
Yeah, where it is in the timeline of what you're up to. I mean, I think that with that Fringe Magnetic album, because I think it was sort of the last bit of kind of really kind of written, improvised, weirder kind of jazz music I'd done. It was just at this point where I was making more, basically, ostensibly like electronic music. So it happened. I think that kind of was like a blueprint for what I was going to go on and do a bit more, or it was maybe my first fully like I'm going to move away from this kind of jazz, more kind of improv-y jazz thing. But yeah, and the Blur thing, and I mean, yeah, that was just a really, like I say, it wasn't a particularly creative moment, but it's just an exciting moment to be part of. And hopefully they'll do some more London shows, but if they don't ever, then it's quite a cool thing to have done the last one. And have, what was he called that did Park Life?
Oh, yes, thingy from Quadrophenia.
Phil Daniels, yeah.
Paul Daniels, the magician.
Paul Daniels, I always say that. He came down and did Park Life, which was great as well. Actually, another amazing gig we did with Jamie was we've done a few at the Hollywood Bowl, which have been really... I think some of those big Jamie shows where they're more of an event and there's a bigger band, and we did one at the Hollywood Bowl, which was really special, with an amazing like crack squad of LA session musicians with a full big band, which was like pretty intimidating, but pretty amazing as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then it's There's been lots, I guess. It's I'm lucky. There's look, working with smaller independent artists as well is always a total privilege.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and it's interesting, particularly younger, smaller or newer, smaller independent artists. There is less of that, even though they want to get someone, they probably possibly don't want to be a small independent artist. Yeah. There isn't that almost that weight of
expectation.
Yeah, it's got to be another hit. You've got to recoup.
Yeah. There's less sort of people steer. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? There's less people steering you. There's you're left to your own devices more. But it's the catch-22 of like you say, most people who are that smaller artist don't want to be that smaller artist. But I don't know. Is there like a purple patch of being halfway?
There must be. There must be where you're doing enough and your shows are good, and the label kind of lets you get on with everything. Yeah. But I suppose there's always that thing where there's the cliche, grass is greener. And I guess it would probably be the people at the higher end of the independent scene than it would be the people at the lower end of the major label scene. Because people at the lower end of the major labels scene, there's this always on the cusp of being dropped or budgets being cut or like loads of people being chopped and changed all the time. Whereas if you're somebody like, I don't know, Tom York doing Tomorrow's Modern Boxes and you make enough money and he is not taking a shit, he's just going to do what he wants to do. Maybe that's a good place to be, but I mean, you ask him. he probably wouldn't agree, but yeah. Brilliant. Well, listen, last question, this has been fantastic.
Thank you. It's been great.
So how has the whole dreaded CVD-19 situation affected your the whole process of what you've been doing? Well,
it's interestingly, it's weird. I'm normally pretty good at being quite productive all the time. So I'm not somebody who needs. I think a lot of people have used this COVID-19 thing as like that. Right, I'm going to hunker down and make loads of good shit. But because I'm quite good at sort of forcing myself into being productive and preemptively working on stuff. Hasn't changed that much in that regard. I've just been getting on and doing what I would normally do. I was in the middle of touring with Jamie, and that all got cancelled, and we lost a UK and European tour plus the whole summer of gigs, festivals. So that's been pretty disastrous. But in terms of actually being creative and productive, it's not been so bad. But then it ebbs and flows. There's times where you're I've seen a lot of people posting things on Twitter saying, please don't feel the need to come out with a COVID lockdown album because there's not enough, it's okay just to hang out with your cat for 4 months or your kids for 4 months, which is what I've been doing. So there's a bit of that as well. It's there is going to be a lot of weight of music coming out and that's not a reason not to contribute to it, but it is a reason to think about when will be a sage time to release music and there might need to be a different approach to how you might do that. But I've been sort of getting on steadily, but then there have been, there've been bumps in the road of where you're just what am I doing now? What is the outlet for this? But I've been lucky. I've had bits and pieces of sessions throughout this period. So I have done not loads, but in the last month, I've done 3 or 4 sessions, trumpet sessions from home. I've done a bit of pitch, add pitch and sync work from home. A little bit of arranging coming up this next week. A bit of other co-writing and finishing mix stuff with a few artists and co-writing stuff. So things have ticked over. Yeah. But in terms of focusing myself, it's generally been all right, but there have been bumps in the road, and I totally understand where people get that. You have to be very mentally resilient to not when you work in an industry such as ours to not feel some of that. Those bumps, Oh,
absolutely.
It's a difficult time. But and also I think the practice thing as a trumpet player. I mean, you know, not all I do now is a trumpet player. It's only maybe 50% of what I do at the moment. But normally when things are ticking over, a good part of my week is actually practicing the trumpet, keeping my chops together, keeping my facility together. But when you haven't got that need to do that because of gigs, you end up not doing that. Yeah. And there is something in that type of practice, that kind of mechanical practice of keeping your ability on the instrument, which is quite what's the word? It's quite grounding and quite focusing and meditative as well, in a way. It's kind of almost like exercise, I think. You know, when you have to do some technical work on your instrument, it's like it's good for the headspace as well. And when you haven't got that, I think I haven't noticed how not doing that has meant that, like, actually I need something that's meditative. You need something in your life that is a little bit more ordered, and you just quietly go and do it. And whether that's meditating or yoga or practice, you know, I think they all in a way occupy that same headspace. So I think the lack of a need to practice has been a bit difficult. But yeah, I don't know. It's just finding a way through. The writing thing, I still feel spurred to do. I've written a lot during this period, but it's just working out how that might
become a thing.
Yeah, how that might, you know, all these different projects. So some stuff is being released already, but other things you're like, how am I, you know, if it's my music, how am I going to release that, when and how, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, because you're right.
I'm working my way around it. I think it's like bumps in the road, but generally it's been all right.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I would say.
I mean, for me, and I've surprised people who know what I'm like. I've said, I can't wait to do my first sound check.
Right.
Because I utterly abhor sound checks. I find them the most pointless, annoying thing ever. And now I'm actually looking forward to doing one. That's the thing for me. It's like, I'm always looking forward to that order regime of, right, 4:30 we are sound checking till 6. Whereas in the past, when you just become so blasé about it, then you're like, oh, I can't be asked.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, sound check is just something that interrupts your nice day looking around the city.
Exactly. It's like, I promise I'll be there in the venue for 8:30, and we're on stage at 9. It's fine. You know? Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I mean, I haven't played with any other musicians at all. It's been interesting doing some sessions for, like, I've been doing a few sessions for a great producer called Kerry Willits. No, you know Kerry. And that's been really interesting, doing remote trumpet sessions for him. And it's felt almost like we have been in the same room, because it's been like, I will do a take. He's been using that, is it Audio Movers device, where you can share, and he'll be on FaceTime and he'll be like, yeah, can we just try that again? And that's felt quite collaborative. But being in the same room with somebody is really the thing that I've missed. And I'm hoping that's going to happen soon. I mean, actually, I did do a couple of sessions last week. I did a session in Abbey Road last week with Big Band, which was great. And they'd taken loads of care to put up Perspex screens everywhere, and everybody was temperature checked when they went in. But we were so far, there was 4 trumpets in the section, and we were like 2 meters apart. Didn't really feel like playing in the section. It was so far away from everybody. And, you know, you had to wear masks as soon as you got up off your chair. We had to finish and put the music in a special bin, the physical music, because it had to be, I guess they need to be seen to be leading, don't they? That studio needs to be seen to be where the yardstick for how everyone else needs to follow. But that's the way it's been, really. I mean, I am looking forward to getting out and doing some gigs, but when that'll be, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, I think long time.
Yeah, really, I think next year is probably. I mean, the other problem is, like, things are clashing for next year. I mean, I've seen so many diaries are in flux at the moment, and I think things will change again. But at the moment, there's like loads of stuff clashing next year, and I'm trying to work out how you know, how I'm going to slot things in without saying too much. You know, trying to work out how. Yeah,
I think maybe a minute, just let it stay clashed.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm doing. Just because, like, I think things are going to move again. Who knows?
Right. Well, listen, thank you. I've taken up an hour and a half of your time, so I'll do the formal wrap-up. This will be a virtual, huge round of applause, but just one from me here.
Yeah.
And all the audience who will be watching it, to the fantastic Rory Simmons. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, David.